press record now. Recording in progress, it says. Joyous salutations, distinguished compatriots. It is I, Nicholas Budgen, with another exciting installment of my delightful new podcast, Inside Budgen's Brain, a platform for exploring the various thought-provoking political, economic, and philosophical conundrums that I find so thought-provoking. Today, I will have the one and only Eric Gao, Lord Gao of Shanghai, China, returning as my guest.
Yeah, I'm very glad to rejoin the second episode of Nicholas Budgen, Mr. Nicholas Budgen's podcast right now. Since we've already did it another time, I believe this time the content we had and the topic we had will make our audience feel more interested. So yeah, so Nico, you can begin. Yeah, I have a very high expectations on you.
Marvelous. Ladies and gentlemen, you will no doubt be aware from watching the television that British politics is in an interregnum. That is a period just before some sort of decisive sea change, a period of slight confusion and bewilderment. Across the United Kingdom, voters seem incredibly disgruntled with the established political parties. In England, both the Labour Party and the Tories are internally divided. We have seen the emergence of the National Conservative movement, consisting of right-wing firebrands who believe British liberalism has gone too far. These commentators, including the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, hold very right-wing and some would say prejudiced and extremist views on a variety of matters, including immigration and LGBT plus rights. Eric is nodding along. But interestingly, these commentators, despite claiming to speak up for Middle England, for the silent majority, to use the Trumpian parlance, have very peculiar views and actually very unpopular views. According to polling by YouGov, 85% of Britons believe women should have the right to an abortion. Meanwhile, 73% of Brits support the recognition of same-sex marriage. So if the Tory party is keen to rebrand itself and revitalise its appeal, having struggled in the opinion polls for so long, it seems it could do far better than pursuing this rather ignorant and ill-conceived socially conservative agenda. And yet, even as Mr. Johnson faces all of this trouble for his mishandling of the coronavirus pandemic, and even as the Tories struggle to govern the nation in the interests of the British public, the Labour Party is also in a difficult position. It has run a series of very, very controversial, divisive attack ads on the Conservatives, some of which imply that Mr. Sunak has no problem with record high levels of crime in the United Kingdom. So, and meanwhile, the SNP, good Lord, its former leader and former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, was arrested just a few weeks ago. And meanwhile, public services in Scotland really are languishing. And it seems that having pontificated a great deal about building a new Jerusalem for the people of Scotland, the Nationalist Party has failed to deliver even a slough. It has failed spectacularly in its efforts.
Yeah, goodness me, Nicholas. Wouldn't you argue that this disillusioned voters should join you in backing the Liberal Democratic parties? Since we all know you are not just a member to the Liberal Democrats, you are also a big fan to this party. So as you have noted, the voters across the United Kingdom are disgruntled with both Labour and the Tories, And the SNP party seems to be losing support in Scotland, especially after the incident just happened a few weeks ago. We all know the Nicholas Sturgeon incident. Yeah, and so why has your dear party had relatively little success in appealing to those voters? And besides that, why is it that supporter for the Liberals still hovers at below 20% according to most opinion polls?
What an excellent question, Eric. The Liberals have gained quite a bit of traction in recent years for our spectacular by-election victories under the wonderful Sir Ed Davey. Cheshire and Amersham, North Shropshire, and Tiverton and Honiton were all remarkable successes in which our party overtook quite large Tory majorities by appealing to thousands of disillusioned voters, many of whom were former Conservative voters who would have never previously thought of voting for my dear party. And we did so by campaigning on a variety of local issues, particularly the poor governance of hospitals and issues relating to public transportation in rural communities. But I accept your point, Mr. Gow. The other parties, in particular the Tories, are often keen to mock my party's liberal stances on a variety of social issues. One notable example, of course, would be our support for the legalization of marijuana, which is a policy that we've researched quite a bit, and our various advocates believe would be very successful and very credible, but nonetheless does deter voters. I've heard this on the doorstep. People have said that they agree with my party on several issues and respect our candidate and local team very much, but they are very much discouraged from voting for the Liberals by some of these stances. It seems, therefore, that even as we propose with quite a bit of traction various popular policies, such as the windfall tax on enormous energy firms and increased wages for hard-working carers, increased financial support for those carers, we struggle to gain much support. And there remains a sizable chunk of the electorate across Britain who would never consider voting Liberal.
Wow. Wow, very good viewpoints, Nicholas. And it seems that it seems that even as they try to appear moderate and respectable to show their empathy, all three major parties plus the SNP in Scotland remain deeply unpopular. It's no wonder then that opportunistic activists have established their own parties.
Indeed. That leads very nicely to our topic of discussion today. We shall discuss the rise and subsequent collapse of the United Kingdom Independence Party. This podcast has a very fitting title, Farage, Barrages, Britain. In my recent reflections, I have struggled to think of a more influential opposition politician than Mr. Nigel Farage. Despite his party, the UK Independence Party, having just 2 seats in the House of Commons at its peak, it has done tremendous damage, I would argue, to British political institutions. I would argue, if it were not for UKIP, the United Kingdom would not have faced that decisive referendum and would therefore not have left the European Union. Now, this party has quite a thought-provoking backstory, which requires some thoughtful examination. The UK Independence Party, which was actually first called the Anti-Federalist League, emerged from a split within the Tory party. Many Eurosceptic MPs, including my grandfather, the late great Nicholas Budgen MP, took great issue with the UK's integration into the European community and subsequently the European Union. So an academic named Alan Sked, who was the head of European Studies at the prestigious London School of Economics, founded this party, the Anti-Federalist League, In 1991, this was very much a single issue party, squarely concerned with opposing the ratification of the Maastricht Treaty, which greatly strengthened integration between members of the European community and laid the foundations for the European Union we all know and many of us love to this day. Eric, I now hand over to you, good sir.
Yeah. Wow. London School of Economics is a really prestigious school, especially on economics and some financial subjects, as you said, Nicholas. So, much like Labour, the Tories and indeed your party, Labour Democrats, UKIP, United Kingdom, UK Independent Party, has fallen victim to much infighting. Didn't its founder, Alan Scott, as you said, feel compelled to leave the party?
That is spot on, Eric. Though it was initially only a very niche outfit, the Anti-Federalist League, which later became UKIP, gained tremendous national attention from its early days. This ragtag of disgruntled, mostly quite elderly men, elderly blokes from the south of England, found themselves dealing with all sorts of division. The founder, Alan Sked, as Eric rightly noted, evicted Nigel Farage from the party, which was quite a decisive move. He did so on account of Mr. Farage's alleged supposedly intimidating behaviour, and apparently quite a few very right-wing and rather extreme members had joined the party under Mr. Farage's influence. Now, as a little detour, Mr. Sked had a very clear view of how the UK Independence Party should organise itself. He believed that the best route for opposing Euro-federalism was to campaign relentlessly in the British parliamentary elections. Mr. Sked was staunchly opposed to UKIP fielding elections for the European Parliament. He believed in doing so, it would just legitimise these European institutions, give them credibility and give them more attention than they deserved. We shall find out later how much the tables turned, so to speak. Mr. Sked left UKIP in 1997, shortly after Blair had secured a thumping landslide victory for the relatively pro-European Labour Party. Mr. Sked had struggled to maintain party discipline following the entry of racist and very extreme activists. Tragically, the party leadership disregarded Mr. Sked's concerns, and UKIP became increasingly illiberal. Eric?
Yeah. So, Nicholas, as you noted, UK Independence Party's influence peaked in especially 2015, following a spectacular victory at the European parliamentary elections. And as you have already noted, it's all too easy to dismiss Farage's UK Independence Party as a bunch of populistic boffins. But by 2015, it had become a major threat to Britain's liberal economic and political consensus.
Your analysis is, as ever, spot on, Lord Gow. As a Liberal, I am staunchly opposed to UKIP's hostile rhetoric towards migrants and its isolationist foreign and economic policies. But one must admire, if that is the correct verb, Mr. Farage's laser-focused determination. His fiery rhetoric asserting that Britain was in danger of losing its much admired sovereignty to unaccountable bureaucrats struck a chord with thousands of disgruntled voters, and it became all too easy to blame foreigners in Brussels and indeed migrants for a variety of social and economic ills. At the 1999 European parliamentary elections, the party secured just 3 seats. A decent performance, but hardly hardly groundbreaking. Ironically, the European Parliament's proportional voting system, designed to ensure that a high vote share corresponds with a high degree of representation in the Parliament, had resulted in UKIP enjoying considerable influence with which it could metaphorically beat the European Commission with a stick. So consequently, UKIP muddled along for a few years, gaining some influence, but not enjoying tremendous traction outside the European Parliament. It enjoyed a few decent results at parliamentary elections, but failed to break the stranglehold that Labour and the Tories, plus sort of the Liberals, held on British politics. At the 2001 election, it held its deposit in just one seat, so it secured more than 5% of votes in just one constituency. Mr. Farage assisted. And aided by the defection of two right-wing parliamentarians, Douglas Carswell and Mark Reckless, the party gained mainstream appeal. Now, UKIP had briefly enjoyed elected representation because in 2008, the Tory MP Dr. Bob Spink defected to UKIP, but he subsequently left the party and UKIP gained his constituency. This concept of infighting and bitter backstabbing is a recurring theme in the history of the UK Independence Party. So we shall explore that issue later. But at the 2014 European parliamentary elections, UKIP placed first, securing 27.49% of the popular vote. Said result proved consequential in persuading David Cameron to adopt more Eurosceptic rhetoric and indeed pledge the highly consequential EU referendum. As a result of UKIP's rise and because of the almost wall-to-wall coverage its European parliamentarians received in the UK, it seemed inevitable that a growing number of voters would take a very staunchly Eurosceptic stance. Farage then led UKIP into the 2015 election, which resulted in the party's best results at Westminster. But despite gaining an impressive 12.6% vote share, which was more than my dear party, the Liberals, I'm afraid to remark, UKIP secured just one seat in the House of Commons, with Mr. Carswell being re-elected as the Member of Parliament for Clacton. Eric.
Wow. Yeah. So, wow. Thank you, Mr. Budgen. So, despite having only one member of parliament, the party exerted considerable influence. Several pundits have nicknamed the Nigel Farage, Mr. Farage, a bad boy of Brexit. Oh my God, it's a very, to be honest, I think it's a very cute and lovely nickname. For his role in promoting Eurosceptical sentiment, it fair so to argue that Mr. Farage has been among the most influential politicians in the last decade?
That is a credible view. UKIP's quite remarkable successes in 2014 and 15 highlighted the tremendous apathy voters across Britain, but especially in deindustrialised localities in the north of England, Wales, and indeed much of the southeast of England, particularly in various coastal and fairly rural communities in Essex and Kent, felt towards their politicians. Most pundits with more than a few brain cells have quite comprehensively debunked UKIP's rather buffoonish argument that high levels of immigration from the EU and elsewhere, plus membership of the European Union, were responsible for such issues as low productivity sluggish wage growth, and the relatively poor performance of vital public services. But nonetheless, Mr. Farage, with his very striking mannerisms and his very defiant rhetoric, was highly effective in convincing millions of voters, many of whom had previously backed the Labour Party, that EU membership and high levels of immigration were responsible for declining living standards. I should emphasise that by 2014/15, UKIP had adopted immigration as its second most important issue after Brexit. Interestingly, Alan Sked had warned UKIP against mentioning immigration in such detail. And as we will find later, he was very much right to warn against such populist rhetoric. I believe very firmly that Faragism, this very hostile approach to immigration, and combined with a very socially conservative stance more broadly, is evident in the current hostility that politicians such as Suella Braverman and indeed Rishi Sunak express towards supposedly woke, in inverted commas, policies. Mr. Farage had by 2016 had a profound impact on British politics, very much stirring up resentment towards the relatively socially and economically liberal policies that New Labour and the coalition had pursued. UKIP appealed to voters by offering a mix of social conservatism, so a tough stance on law and order, on immigration, on international relations, plus quite striking opposition to activity by trade unions, matched with very interventionist economic policies. Now, it's quite understandable that so many voters who'd really struggled for donkey's years, but particularly in the wake of the financial crisis, would sympathise with such policies. Following the 2008 crisis and the introduction of austerity policies, living standards in Britain had sadly declined, with levels of relative poverty increasing. UKIP offered such eye-catching policies as an additional 12 billion quid in funding for the NHS, and the recruitment of the building, I should say, of 100 million new affordable homes. Though pundits generally, and quite understandably, focus on its anti-immigrant rhetoric and staunch Euroscepticism, I believe these policies were highly effective in raising its mainstream appeal. Without such interventionist and actually quite left of centre economic and social policies, UKIP would not have commanded the support it enjoyed across Yorkshire and the Humber, the West Midlands, Wales, and indeed much of the south of England. Eric.
Oh, so Mr. Farage infamously resigned as UKIP's leader in 2016. Shortly after the European Union referendum result became public knowledge, did UKIP, this party, exerted much influence under Mr. Farage's successor?
The easy answer to that excellent question, Eric, is no. After the 2016 referendum, UKIP faced an identity crisis. UKIP continued to receive plentiful media attention following Farage's resignation, but often for entirely the wrong reasons. Its membership elected Diane James, an MEP for the South East of England, as its leader, and I believe she's among the first female leaders of an opposition party. In fact, she would have been, good lord. She lasted just 18 days, a record Liz Truss would probably be quite proud of. And following her her resignation, her ousting, the membership elected Paul Nuttall as leader. Mr. Nuttall, an MEP for the northwest of England, struggled to persuade voters that his party deserved their support over the now pro-Brexit and more right-wing Conservatives. Mr. Nuttall stood in the subsequent Stoke-on-Trent Central by-election, and UKIP activists really chucked everything and the kitchen sink at this contest. But alas, its efforts were to little consequence. UKIP's vote share increased by a pretty pathetic 2.2%. Mr. Nuttall came a distant second place behind the Labour Party, whose candidate received 47% of votes. The Tory party's movement to the right under Ms May resulted in UKIP losing much of its appeal. Thus, even as May's popularity tumbled, thousands of UKIP voters opted to back the Tories, in most cases because they were very concerned about inadvertently electing a Labour government. At the 2017 general election, Mr. Nuttall came a dismal third place in the constituency of Boston and Skegness, which had among the highest Leave votes in Britain. UKIP's vote share in that seat fell by 26.1%, and after a pretty poor performance, Mr. Nuttall resigned as leader the following day.
That's indeed a bad performance. Yeah. So UKIP's leadership has, since its founding in 1990s, struggled to restrain its extremist faction. I understand that since Mr. Latour's departure, the extremists and rishis in this party have taken control.
Indeed, following Mr. Nuttall's resignation, UKIP's members elected Henry Bolton, a former soldier, as their leader. Now, concerningly, the far right activist, emphasis on far, Anne-Marie Waters came second. She would later form her own party for Britain before rejoining UKIP in 2023. David Curtin, a member of the London Assembly, placed third and later founded his own socially conservative party named the Heritage Party. UKIP's executive later ejected Mr. Bolton from the leadership after it had emerged that he had engaged in an affair with a party member who had made racist remarks about Meghan Markle. Mr. Nuttall subsequently left UKIP in 2018, citing concerns about its adoption of even more illiberal policies. UKIP's popularity tumbled further when Mr. Farage resigned as leader, later to form his own party, the Brexit Party, to lobby for a hard Brexit and social conservatism. Mr. Nuttall and, well, such notable figures as Anne Widdecombe, a former Tory minister, joined Mr. Farage in standing as candidates for the populist Brexit Party, now Reform UK. Alan Skedd's concerns were further vindicated when the UKIP membership elected the utterly buffoonish and horrible Gerard Batten, whose illiberal rhetoric on immigration attracted the support of controversial figures such as the YouTubers Carl Benjamin and Paul Joseph Watson. Now, I will spare you the trouble of researching these chaps. These blokes have pretty appalling views, I'm afraid to remark. Mr. Benjamin in particular had made some incredibly misogynistic remarks about the wonderful Labour MP Jess Phillips. The Brexit Party, led by the charismatic Mr. Farage, avoided these racist arguments mostly and secured the most seats at the 2019 European parliamentary elections, which of course had to take place because of the extension to the Article 50 process. UKIP subsequently became a rather pathetic shadow of its former self, having lost every single seat it had held in the European Parliament. Batten resigned as leader shortly after the elections. Eric.
Wow. Having lost almost all of his seats in the parliament, that's a defeat, absolutely a defeat. So, Nicholas, it's been fascinating to know about how UK Independence Party rose to become such an influential force on the right of British politicals, only to become largely irrelevant. Yet some determined loyalists continue to wave the UK flag. So what's your opinion on this development?
That's an excellent point, Eric. UKIP's demise offers a warning to other populist parties, notably Farage's Reform UK and the Reclaim Party, which now has one seat in the British Parliament following the defection of the ignoramus Andrew Budgen. The Overton window concerns what rhetoric, what views are acceptable given the current political climate. In the 2010s, Farage's activism caused the Overton window to shift quite dramatically to the right, such that these more socially conservative and indeed isolationist views have become more acceptable with the British public. But even as voters have expressed concern about the scale of social change, almost all Brits are horrified, absolutely horrified by the blatant racism espoused by Mr. Gerard Batten and indeed Tommy Robinson, the founder of the English Defence League, who Mr. Batten recruited as an advisor. These people have not just made slightly near-the-knuckle remarks about immigrants. They have advocated the whole tremendous restrictions on the freedoms of ethnic minorities, including the banning of the burqa, and have argued that Islam, a religion of millions of very peaceful adherents in Blighty, poses a threat to British values. So it's no wonder, therefore, that particularly now that the Tories have become very firmly the party of social conservatism and Brexit, that so many former UKIP voters have turned to the Tory party and, in some cases, the slightly more right-wing Reform UK. Eric.
Yeah, wow, brilliant, Mr. Budgen. You have again dazzled me with the bright light of your majestic intellect. You're such a smart English gentleman. Thank you so much. I am certain our listeners and audience too have enjoyed listening to your account of rise and fall of UK Independence Party. And also I enjoyed your speech very much. Thank you, Mr. Budgen.
Thank you very much indeed, Eric, for your excellent company. Well, chaps and chapettes, thank you very much indeed for listening to this podcast. We hope you have found these comments regarding the rise of the UK Independence Party enlightening. Please stay tuned to my podcast, Inside Budgen's Brain, for more thought-provoking chinwags. I intend to host a further series of interesting commentaries covering various other niche political parties. All that remains to be said is cheerio and Godspeed.